Hey everybody, it's Ian, and look who I'm here with. I'm here with Kevin Gray. Somebody pinch me. Kevin, thanks for joining me. What a thrill this is for me.
My pleasure, Ian. Good to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so I rewatched your interview with Chad Kassem and your interview.
Well, you waded through that, huh?
Yeah, I watched it 3 hours last night. I watched it. I watched it when it originally came out, and then I watched it again last night because I'm trying to.
I have to be honest, I haven't even watched it.
I'm the same way. I've done a few interviews for different things, and I'm the same way.
Well, I've watched other ones, but that one just went forever. Anyway, said about that.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is your cut of Steely Dan's. No, I'm kidding. No. And then I also rewatched the Michael and Danny.
Danny K. Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, those are both great and super informative, and there's a lot of information out there. But I just, I've got my own tastes, and I've still got questions, believe it or not, after.
Okay. No, that's cool.
After all those hours of interviews. So what I'm curious about, so what when you meet someone on the street or whatever, like, what do you tell people you do for a living? Like, how do you describe yourself?
I usually start out by saying, remember black vinyl phonograph records? And that's I cut the masters that are used in the manufacturing of those.
Right. Like, is there a specific title that, like, do you call yourself a mastering engineer in general, or do you cut your?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Mastering is suddenly something different. It means, squashing the hell out of music. It doesn't really mean finesse anymore. Sorry,
yeah.
But
no, totally. And these sort of semantics are kind of what I'm getting at here. And so, like, if you look up the definition of what a master is in the dictionary, the more sort of generic definition is a master is a thing you're going to copy, right?
Uh-huh.
And so now in the digital era, that means a couple of different things, right? So once upon a time, all that could have meant was the thing you're going to copy is a disc with grooves in it. And so you're the guy that makes the disc with that initial disc with grooves in it, right?
Right.
And then the digital era comes along, and it kind of changes. And how I sort of look at digital mastering is basically like, oh, I guess maybe what I should say real quick is that, like, so, like, that's the production master, but then there's also the master recording, right? So from another point of view, the thing you're copying is the music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at digital mastering is sort of like a final stage of like the studio recording process in a way, rather than the beginning of the production process like a lacquer.
Well, yeah, I think it always has been, even going back to the pure vinyl era. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I used to
it's this in between era, in between sort of zone, right? It's part of the creative process because you're influencing the sound of the recording, but it's also the beginning of the production process.
Right. When people used to ask me, what is mastering all about, I would tell them it's sort of the audio equivalent of photo retouching.
Mm-hmm.
You're just kind of adding a bit of nuance to everything to try to make everything flow from track to track. You're not trying to remix it. You're not trying to present something new to people, really. You're trying to just produce it in the best possible light.
Yeah. And so for me, like, in the digital era, there's this sort of like conflation of processes here. And so, like, I'm coming at this from the sort of consumer standpoint of, like, trying to figure out what the heck a record, what's the sourcing? That's really what it comes down to, right?
Uh-huh.
And, like, that's the constant battle of like trying to decipher the wording on hype stickers and liner notes and figuring out, well, what did they use? They're not coming right out and saying it, right? So, like, for example, and I'm not asking you to comment on the work of this. I'm just so this is the most recent AC/DC reissues, right?
Okay.
And it says on here, remastered from the original tapes by George Marino at Sterling Sound.
Okay.
And
that must have been done a few years ago because he's passed on.
No, it's 2003.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. The late great George Marino. And but who do you think cut the record? Not George Marino. It's Ray Janis cut the record.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so, again, not that I think that you have any specific insight about this record, but this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Of like how does the consumer, like, interpret this stuff? Like, for me, when I see that, what I think is, okay, George Marino accessed the master tape, and he probably transferred it to digital, and then prettied it up digitally, and then handed that off to Ray Janos to cut it. That seems to be the most reasonable understanding of something like that. And again, not that I think you have specific insight about this particular release, but like, is that how you would also interpret such a thing?
No, not necessarily. Yeah, that's one possibility. But it's also possible that Ray just mastered it from the original analog tape using George Marino's mastering notes.
Oh, interesting.
That's happened at several facilities that I've worked at where they have more than one room or more than one mastering engineer. As a matter of fact, when I worked at Artisan Sound Recorders, there were 3 engineers, and we were all not mastering, but let's say, I would consider the mastering actually the rundown where you set the levels and the EQ and all that good stuff. But you might be cutting something. I might be cutting something that Bob McLeod had mastered. I might be cutting something that John Golden had mastered, or vice versa. It could go both ways, all 3 ways. That's
so interesting. I'd never thought of it from that. I didn't realize that was sort of part of the process.
Yeah, well, I certainly don't know that that's the case in that
record. Right.
It's another possibility that before you throw it out the window as a digital master or something, it isn't necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just find it so fascinating. Like you would sort of expect that that record companies would want to sort of shout it from on high when it is an all analog cut, because that seems to be a highly desirable thing. And yet you talked about in one of the other interviews about I think you cut Kind of Blue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all analog, I believe you said.
Right.
And they didn't sticker it at all. Like you have no idea how to even get the thing. Is that?
Yeah. Well, actually, no. That I don't remember what was said about that, but no, Kind of Blue was not all. It was from High Res Digital, and that's because Sony would no longer allow master tapes to be sent to the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only telling you this because that was so long ago. That was done back in 2000. No, when was that done? It was supposed to have been for the 50th anniversary, and they did it, and people didn't like it, and so I redid it a couple of years after. So maybe it was 2011, I think, that I cut that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, something like that. But see, I have, before we go any further, I won't keep breaking that rule, because I was asked by all of the major labels independently at around the same time. I would say it was around 2005. Do not reveal sources.
That was going to be my next question. Like,
unless
we
make a public, announcement or sticker it or whatever, it's nobody's business what it was cut from. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, but since I do like doing work for people and getting paid, I have adhered to that pretty much.
Gotcha. I'm not going to ask you to bite the hand that feeds you. Yeah.
Okay.
Although I will strike about 10 of my questions here.
Oh, sorry.
No, that was one of my questions.
Is this one analog? Was that one analog? Was this one analog?
I did want to kind of do a lightning round on that, but I won't.
Okay.
But yeah, I did want to ask you, to what degree are labels comfortable with that? And it sounds like they're not comfortable with that. And like, do they make you even like sign an NDA and stuff?
No, they haven't. But I've just adhered to their
gotcha.
Request. But here's when people email me and they ask me the question, I just say what I just said. Well, I've been asked by all the major labels to not reveal that. But let me ask you a question. Do you find anywhere where it says in the promotional material that it was cut from the original analog tapes by Kevin Gray? And they say no. And I say, well, there's an answer in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm vague about it, but I kind of give them an answer.
Right. Okay.
Because if it is AAA, I think people are going to brag about it.
Oh, totally. At the same time, I do think there's a certain degree of like not wanting to devalue the rest of their product.
Uh-huh.
Like, for example, there's this recent series of PJ Harvey reissues that were all cut by one particular person, but one of them was cut by Bob Weston. And it was recorded by Steve Albini. And Steve Albini is listed as like mastering advisor or something along those lines.
Right, and they're in the same town, right?
They're in the same town, so I just can't imagine a universe in which Steve Albini is going to be like, "Hey, why don't you cut from those 30-year-old digital masters?"
Yeah, right.
But
it's not listed that way.
It's not listed that way. And again, I think they might not want to devalue the rest of the series. By saying this was all analog. Well, what are these then?
It's possible.
Chopped liver.
Yeah.
Okay, well then,
Interesting stuff.
enough on that then. I'm curious about when cutting from digital started to become commonplace. Because like you talked in some other interviews about how like by 82, mastering engineers at least knew that the CD was coming.
Mhm.
And it's interesting you mentioned 1982 because I don't know if you know where I'm getting at with this, but you know, this isn't your work, but when you look at the liner notes from this 1982 album, it says digitally mastered by JVC 1982.
Wow.
They digitally mastered before cutting a
That,
record
yeah, that was
and
a
Bob
really,
Ludwig cut it.
that would be a really, really early digital recording, because the first system that came out that I remember was the Sony 1600, and then they went to the 1610, and then they went to the 1630. JVC, I think, was kind of competing with them, and they were probably kind of, you know, having the same generations of change, you know. But yeah, the first system that I remember was around 1982, and it was the Sony 1600. So that was probably the JVC equivalent of that.
Mhm.
It would have been 16-bit 44.1, you know,
Exactly.
nothing more.
And like, is that around when you started working with that kind of stuff as well?
No, it was a couple of years later. Well, actually, I did a direct-to-disc recording for Victor Feldman in 1982 called Secret of the Andes, and they ran a simultaneous 1600 tape to put out something, because there weren't CDs yet. So I don't know. I'm sure when they did a CD of that, that's probably what it was done from.
Right.
But yeah, I didn't actually start doing digital mastering until around 86, I think it was, actually.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So when you were at MCA, for example, you were still cutting from tape.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, yeah. There wasn't digital yet. You know, it hadn't become extant
stuff.
because there was no CD yet.
Right.
Because I left there in January '84. So,
yeah.
you know,
right.
That was kind of right when the CD was being launched in the US.
Gotcha. Huh. And then, like, do you have an impression on like, my impression at least is that at a certain point it became common to cut lacquers from digital, like probably by the late 80s or so. Like, do you have kind of a time frame in mind when that became common? Or is that even
I would
true
say
that it
for
became
me,
common?
it was more like the mid 90s that
Mhm.
it became real common. And it's funny because my whole workflow has actually gone full circle. I went from the mid 2000s, it was like 85% digital and 15% analog, to all the way back again. You know, it's like 15% digital and 85% analog. Now that's because I'm doing a lot of work for Universal on jazz reissues, you know, the Tone Poet stuff and the classic stuff, and that's all from the original analog tapes. But and that's a huge part of what I'm doing right now, which is fun but crazy. You know,
yeah,
never would have predicted it.
Mhm.
But you know, I have to say one thing here, and you know, the all AAA analog buffs will probably, you know, hate me for saying this, but I think that if something's done to 24192 or 2496 with really good converters, I don't think most people would be able to tell the difference in an A/B comparison. I really don't.
I totally agree. I've definitely been fooled, and I'm definitely an AAA buff. I prefer
Me too.
AA. I want it, but I've been fooled before.
Yeah.
Well, there's this stuff what I was convinced was analog, and I later learned was digital. So
yeah,
modern high res digital
I'm just,
is amazing, and you can't tell the difference.
I'm just throwing my cards down here, you know. And and the one caveat is I've heard some lousy sounding 24-bit converters. So not all converters are created equal, but if it's done with a really good converter, it's pretty hard to tell. And it, you know, until we got to 2496 with good converters, you know, analog was to me always the hands down winner. And you know, I still prefer cutting from analog. I like analog. You know, I'm all for doing AAA, but just had to throw that out there.
Yep. Yeah. No. Yeah. As much as I love AAA, I think I'm on your side on that.
Okay.
Um,
Michael Fremer would probably disagree with me.
I imagine so.
Or he wouldn't want me saying that. Whatever.
Okay, so another topic I'd like to hit with yet is the concept of tape decay. So this came from there's another guy named Ben Rankins who's got a channel that I've kind of interacted with him a little bit, and he kind of suggested that like all analog stuff is as time goes on is going to get harder and harder and harder. Tapes are going to get worse and worse and worse, and I think there's probably a grain of truth in that, but there's part of me that doesn't totally want to believe that.
Right.
And I think my guess is that it has a little bit to do with maybe the era the tape was made in. So like, for example, you're cutting with 60-year-old tapes on the regular,
Right.
and they're awesome. They're like the best sounding stuff ever made. But I feel like I've read that maybe like tape that was manufactured in maybe the 80s is not as good, and like the oxide tends to flake off on that stuff. Oh,
Mid
mid
70s
70s.
is when that started. Yeah, it was all the Ampex tape. It was 406 and 456 that just deteriorated, and it requires baking the tapes literally in a convection oven to get them to play. And I do that all the time. I'm doing it twice a week.
Yeah. And so like, can you sort of speak to that tape decay issue in general?
Sure.
Like, how much of a problem is it? And do you see it as being more of a problem in different eras of tape or different kinds of music or different or anything like that?
Mostly I would call it a nuisance, not a problem. Because like I said, if I have to bake a tape that I was planning on cutting today, and it just arrived, that's a nuisance, but it doesn't keep me from cutting it. I just have to cut it tomorrow, or something. But Scotch 111 was the tape that we all pretty much lived with from it's even before my time, but going from like 1948, I think is when it was developed, up until about 1964. Almost everything was on Scotch 111. And that tape is, it wasn't the greatest sounding tape, even though some of those records sound great and recordings, but it held up beautifully. The only thing that it's done over time is become more brittle. So you have to be very careful with it.
Which is what the baking fixes?
Pardon me?
Which is what the baking fixes?
No,
or at least...
no, the baking's only for the 70s and later tape.
I see.
Before that, you don't have to bake.
I see.
No, it's just it gets brittle and it tends to break when you're rewinding it, if you're not real careful with it. The good thing about it is that because it was acetate and not Mylar, instead of stretching, it breaks clean. So you just splice it back together again and move on, and nobody's the wiser. but it doesn't happen all the time, but I'd say 3-4 times a year I'll have a tape just break in the middle, in rewinding usually, or fast forwarding, not in playing it. And then you splice it back together and on you go. But then the next batch of tape that came along that replaced 111 in the mid 60s was called Scotch 201, and then there was 202. 201 was still acetate backed, so it would break, not stretch. 202 was Mylar based, and it will stretch if you are not careful with it. I would prefer the clean break to the stretch, because you can't fix a stretch. But anyway, the problem with 201 and 202, for some reason, something changed in the binder that they used for attaching the metal particles, to the backing, and it would flake off over time. I've gotten 201 tapes where you can hold them up to the light and see holes through the tape, of missing oxide.
And what does that sound like?
It sounds like bad tape hiss, is what it kind of sounds like, because it's trying to play music and missing particles, and it just comes out as noise.
And so what do you do about that? Do you have to?
You don't. It's shot. You're done.
Or can you transfer that to the digital realm and fix it that way?
No. No, because it's not like one or two places. It's like happening constantly. If it starts to do this, I think it had something to do with the way the tape was stored long term, because I've had 201 that's perfect. So it's not like it's a constant problem with 201, but I see it more with 201 than any other type of tape.
Is that a moisture thing, or is that like how?
I don't know if it's too dry. I don't know. I can't answer that. Yeah, don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. So it sounds like, where that question ultimately comes from for me is that like I'm finding like a lot of reissues of like 80s stuff tends to not be cut from analog tape, and it disappoints me. And I wondered if it was maybe a tape quality issue, because there's stunning examples out there of like stuff that can be done really well. And I don't mean to keep showing other people's records here, but
it doesn't, I'm not offended.
But my point is that like, see, what I keep thinking though, is that like, there's these tapes out there, like if they recorded it to analog tape and mixed it to analog tape, that mixed down tape is the studio master, right?
Right.
And so as long as that tape exists and is in good shape, you can cut a lacquer from it.
That's right.
And so it just kind of makes me go bonkers sometimes when they don't do that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I can't speak for why they do that, but I've observed it too, you know. Now, if you get past like 87, 88, it could have been recorded digitally and mixed digitally, you know.
Absolutely.
There's the possibility of that.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't remember when the Sony and Mitsubishi systems came out. It might have been more around 1990. I don't remember for sure, but it's kind of all a blur.
And you've talked about a DAC that came out in '92 as being kind of the game changer in terms of sound.
The Wadea WA4000.
Yeah.
That changed my world in terms of digital.
And so, like in general, I don't really buy CDs, but my dad does. So I hear his CDs sometimes, and they sound really good sometimes. And so I think of like modern CDs as sounding good, and like the original run of 10 maybe years or so of CDs is not sounding very good. And is that really what it comes down to? Is just better DACs?
Probably. Well, it's yeah. Well, when you say DAC, it's more like the analog. It's the ADC, not the DAC. You know that.
Oh, of course, right.
Yeah, because it's in your CD player. Yeah. But yeah, the analog to digital converters make a huge difference. Now, the only other problem that kind of goes against what you're saying is around 95, everybody started compressing everything to death. So I try to buy CDs that were made between 92 and like 95 or 96, you know. It's kind of, you know, I really buy very few CDs that were done after 96 because they're just compressed to death.
And that's like an industry-wide thing. Like I had the impression that was maybe just particular kinds of music, like nu metal and stuff like that.
Well, I wrote a little thing on my website about the loudness wars, where I basically said it started out with rap and dance music, and then got into pop music, and then eventually jazz and even classical. So you know, I don't get it, you know. And then the biggest enemy I think was MFIT, you know, mastered for iTunes. But you know what? Universal has stopped doing stuff MFIT. So hooray for them. You know, it's just compression.
Yep. So to what degree do you have any influence on the sourcing? Like, do you ever like get stuff that comes in where you're like, I see what you're doing there. What if you did this instead?
Usually not. I mean, it depends on the, you know, most of the labels that I work with that are going to the trouble, especially if they're doing HQ 180 audiophile type releases, they're going to send me the best sources they've got, period. They are. And I know they are. Yeah. Occasionally, when I get like a CD master to cut from, I'll basically say, hey, haven't you got anything better? But I don't wind up having to do that very often.
Gotcha. Yeah, like, especially not now, I imagine, right? That was probably more common maybe 20 years ago or something.
Yeah, or well, even 10 years ago, but yeah.
Okay. All right, let me go down my list a little bit here. Oh yeah, I wonder if you could, no, that's kind of treading some similar ground. Let's move on to something else. Oh yeah, what tools are at your disposal to influence the sound when cutting a lacquer? So EQ is obvious that you're able to do. What else? What else? What are other kinds of things that you use?
That's most of it. I have a high frequency limiter that I really like that is necessary on a lot of stuff that has vocal sibilance and that sort of thing. And I've heavily modified the particular model that I have. It's made by Ortophone, and it was exceptional. I've never found one that I like better. I've used the Neumann ones and some of the other external ones. But actually, there's some digital devices that do it beautifully, but of course, I'm not using those on analog mastering.
Right.
And so it's that and EQ. I have a custom sort of also kind of a modified Sontec equalizer that I use. It's a 4-band EQ. And
so it surprised me to hear that it's only 4 bands. Like I would expect something super maximalist or something, but no, only 4 bands.
Well, yeah, but I mean, each one has an adjustable frequency, you know.
I see. So you can dial in exactly where you want to get. With each of those.
Right. So it gives me 4 different shots at it.
Yep. Yeah, I recently got a so I'm a home hobby. I'm a musician and I've got a Tascam 424 Porter Studio.
Okay.
So like, you know, not nearly as advanced as what you're dealing with, but it's got that very thing. It's got for the mid range, you can dial in, and I find that really fun to just like,
Nice.
oh, that's where the snare is right there at,
Right.
at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And so you're doing it kind of like that too, of just like you're trying to find a specific thing, so you just dial it until you hit the sweet spot.
Right. I mean, well, mine is stepped controls, so I don't get quite the fine, range of adjustment that you have. But yeah, I mean, I can generally, I've been doing it long enough. I can generally hear. I don't have to do much dialing. I can hear right where I need it. So
Gotcha. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also have a third octave spectrum analyzer, with the little red LEDs. So if I really want to kind of like peer at it closely, I can see where the problems are, particularly in the bass end. You can see, is it really 60 or is it 80? It's like, okay, it's 60. All right.
And that's based on the preview head sending it to that. Yeah.
No, it's just the output of the console. It goes to a spectrum analyzer and an oscilloscope and meters. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
Yeah. Just allows you to see where the problems are visually.
Okay. And I'm seeing how I've got this sort of challenge of like wanting to just like let the conversation flow and go where it takes us, but I also got these questions that I want to address, and so now this is sort of like circling back to something we were already talking about. So sorry for the discontinuity, but
well, you can always do Chad's thing and split it in, do two of them and split it into two.
You could, but you'd have to know how to do stuff with computers.
Okay.
Anyway, so do you have any insight on the reluctance to use original masters or a dub for cutting stuff like Bowie, the Who, Rolling Stones, Beatles, Stereo, Zeppelin, etc., especially in light of, you cut Dylan mono from tape. You cut Kinks mono from tape, I believe.
I did.
Yeah, you cut Birds mono from tape. And so I don't know if this is going to be in the time frame that you're allowed to talk about, but I'm super curious what you cut this from, if you're allowed to talk about it. But there was other stuff from Sabbath that was cut from tape, at least.
That's Warner. We had the original master on that.
Yeah, I thought it was. It was interesting. Like they've gone through different eras of stickering, and so like the older stickers, they don't talk about it, and then eventually they started being explicit about it in the stickers.
Well, that's because everybody got all worked up about it.
And here we are, 15 some years later, and I'm still like, what'd you cut from?
Yeah. I understand.
And Zappa, Hendrix, there's like a long list of stuff that like has been made available, like different estates making different decisions and stuff like that. Do you have any insight on like why are they being so careful? I get that the desire to be careful about stuff, but any insight on why they're so reluctant?
Well, okay. I can give you my take on it. Between the time that a lot of these albums were originally mastered and the time that they came around to wanting to do a reissue of it, they couldn't find the tapes. Now, often the tapes were at the original master facility where it was cut, and they've been there for 30 years or 40 years, or I mean, that's happened.
Yeah.
And whenever somebody can't find a tape, that's the first thing I suggest to them is, where was it mastered last? And if they got a record of that, contact those people. But Sony in particular got really paranoid about this back in the early 2000s. And that was when they basically just put their foot down and say, we're not shipping anything. Basically, if you wanted it cut, you cut it at Sterling from the original master because they were in town.
Right. Now, it's in New York.
Yeah, I think it's a little hypocritical now because they're in Nashville. The mastering, the lacquer part of it.
Really, they don't do any lacquer cutting in New York anymore?
Not at Sterling, and so maybe they've moved it to a different cutting facility. But as far as I know, Ryan Smith is still doing Sony stuff. So they'll ship it to Nashville, but they won't ship it to the West Coast. So I don't know. It's kind of a bug with me. But anyway.
You mentioned in another video about a particular guy at Rhino that you've worked with.
Andrew Sandoval?
I think so. Yeah. And so like,
he was with Rhino.
I kind of wanted to, take out stuff that you've done as I talk about him. It's a little bit more challenging than I realized to do that, but but yeah, like, so he's not there anymore. Interesting. And,
no, he's been gone for a long time. As a matter of fact, the time I really started working with him just at the time he was leaving. We did a Bee Gees box set of the early stuff, going from like 60 64 to maybe 68, 69. I don't remember what the cutoff date was, but I thought that for a second that's what that was. That red jacket is not the Bee Gees Red Velvet one, is it?
It's Talking Head 77.
Oh, Talking Heads. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like, you did these two, and Chris Bellman did the two in between. He did more songs, or yeah, I can't think of the names off the. I can't think of the names on the spot, but Fear of Music and more songs about buildings.
Okay. Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. But yeah, you did those two, and like, yeah, like I get the impression that that like someone there gave a shit, basically.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it was that guy, and that was the case, and that's why they came out in that quality.
Yeah. No, Andrew is one of the best reissue producers that I work with. Can't speak highly enough of his work, and working on the box set of the 3 box sets of the Kinks was just amazing. We did the albums, we did the original 7-inch EPs, and we did the 7-inch singles. Yeah, that was a blast, because I was a huge Kinks fan, to start, and then getting to work on all of that stuff was just kind of a dream come true.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did that. I grew up on my dad's music for a large part, and British Invasion was his thing for sure. And so
me too.
And
I grew up in that era.
Yeah,
I'm probably your dad's age.
I think you're a couple years younger. He's born 49, but
oh
yeah,
yeah,
it's in the ballpark, I think.
4 years, yeah.
Okay, and so I was just this is that and the Beatles and Mono are kind of my two sort of prides and joy of my collection. Like those two things are just on par with each other in my opinion. Just love
I think
them.
the biggest the biggest regret that I have, well, it's not a regret, that's not the right word, I guess, but biggest disappointment, I guess, in my career is that I've never gotten to work on any of the stuff by the Beatles or the Stones. I've worked on just about everybody else, including the British Invasion guys, including the Who. I've done stuff for the Who, and but not the Beatles or the Stones.
Right.
Maybe someday.
And I didn't realize that there was a separate box set for singles and whatnot until one of the video interviews I saw.
On the Kinks.
So that means that you also cut Set Me Free backed with I Need You, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Oh man. So like, I went and found the original of that, but it's not in great shape. I would love to hear your cut of it. So but the only way to get it probably is in a box set, right?
Probably. They put out some of the albums as separates, but I don't think they did that for the EPs or the singles.
Right. That's always the conundrum with box sets is stuffing in more stuff than you necessarily want. But
right.
The Beatles mono collection, or the Kinks mono collection, I'm so happy to have.
Right. Yeah, most people don't realize that the Kinks didn't do much in stereo. Up until Lola and the albums that were released through Warner, most of that stuff was all recorded mono.
Yeah, Lola's the first stereo.
Was it the first one I remember?
Album. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I imagine you can't talk about the first thing, so I won't ask you. But
didn't they? I think they didn't stick to that. That it's from the analog tapes.
It was just vague enough that it gives them wiggle. Remastered from the original master tapes.
There you go.
They didn't say lacquer cut from the original master tape.
No, it was
awesome. Yay. Okay. So I had never heard of Bob McLeod until I heard you talking about him in these other videos, and I'm just curious about a brief thing you said in one of those interviews was something like he's one of the unsung heroes of mastering.
Exactly.
And I guess I'm just super curious about his influence on you.
I everything I am, I owe to Bob. Really. I mean, he taught me all the tricks of the trade, and really took me under his wing. And I spent 4 years hanging out down at Artisan before I actually went to work for him. And
right.
I mean, he let me make like international tape copies. So I was actually doing adjusting the equalizers and doing the fade outs and all this stuff. So I kind of knew everything, and I'd watched him cut enough lacquers that I knew how to operate the lathe. So I was kind of ready to go before he even hired me.
Totally. Which impresses me that you were essentially hired right out of high school. I mean, like, and you've talked also about how like you were just way into electronics on your own, that you were just building stuff on your own because you were just way into it. So I'm sure you obviously had an aptitude for this kind of a thing. So I'm sure that helped. But at the same time, you didn't have that more sort of formal background. You didn't have a college degree.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway, so I guess what I'm getting at is that, like, how does one sort of let's say asking for a friend. Let's say you wanted to get into cutting lacquers. Like, how would you even go about doing that at this point? You know,
I don't have an answer for that.
I get the feeling that it's a little bit like trying to be an NFL quarterback. You know,
Yeah.
because you know there's just a limited number of blades out there. Like there's only I mean, you know, demand is increasing and all that, but there's still only so many lathes, and so there's only so many people who are going to operate them.
Right. It's very true. Yeah, it was a whole different thing back in my day because, well, actually, at the time that I started mastering, I don't think there were really schools for it, but very shortly after that, there were. You know, maybe 5 years after I started cutting, there were schools, you know, where you could learn to cut. There was one called Sound Masters in, where were they, in North Hollywood, I think. Brian Inglesby, who had worked at Universal or MCA, ran that. And yeah, you could go in there and operate a lathe and learn how to cut. And I taught it for a while for a couple of independent schools. One was called the Institute of Audio Video Engineering. And they would have me teach out of my studio for them, you know, and I would make it into an 8-week course. And I enjoyed teaching it. It was fun. And it's funny that the guy who was the editor, I think he's still the editor of Absolute Sound, Robert Harley. We bumped into each other one day and at like a hi-fi show or CES, and he said, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I went, "Remember you?" And he goes, "I took your mastering class in 1980." It was just like in 2000, you know. No, I didn't remember that. Of course, it looked different too. But anyway.
Huh. Yeah. So like, how do you see things sort of moving forward with
I'm concerned, and I'll tell you why. With all of the plants totally inundated now, and it's taking 8 months sometimes to get a record out, I think that doesn't necessarily bode well for the phonograph record's longevity, because if people can't get a record out, they're going to just drop it as a format. Now, the other side of the coin is it could just go back to the way things were in the 90s, where all these little guys were licensing from the majors. Maybe that would be a better thing. I don't know. But something's got to give somewhere.
Right.
And yeah, so moving forward, I don't know where it's going. I haven't been able to predict that from the beginning.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking just in terms of like the actual sort of know-how, like kind of a delicate subject maybe, but like, you've been doing this for 50 years. And Bernie's probably been doing this for 50 years. And right. John Golden's been doing it for about 50 years. It's not going to be 50 more years. Let's put it that way.
No.
And so like, are you all sort of like actively training people and actively sort of like passing on your knowledge, or like, how does that even work?
I've trained, 2 or 3 people, depending on how you count it. I trained one guy who I was going to hire. The problem was I never quite got busy enough to hire him. Then another guy wanted to learn, and he's a friend of a friend. And so I trained him, and now he's cutting for Chad Casson back on the Mastering Lab system in Kansas.
I remember you talked about him in one of the other
Matt
videos.
Luthen. Yeah. I trained him. Then the third, I don't really consider that I trained, because she knew a lot when she came to hang out with me for a month. Her boss in Germany actually made arrangements with me for her to come over for a month and hang out with me 2 days a week. And her name is Sydney Meyer, and she cuts at what used to be the DGG facility, which is now just called Emil Berliner Studios in Berlin. And she was a kick. I really like Sydney a lot, and she knew how to cut records, but hopefully she got a few nuanced things from me. I don't know, but yeah, it was fun. But so that's 3. But it's a lot of it's a real effort to train people, and it kind of takes away from your focus. And one of the reasons that I haven't done more of it is, I have such a huge backlog of stuff right now. I mean, this 2020 sucked. I mean, there's just no getting around that because of everything that happened with COVID. And, even though I was a one-man band and I could keep cutting, the plants were shutting down, even worldwide. They were shut down in Germany and Holland and France and, and then most of the plants here. So that was a bad year, but 2021, 2020, and now 2022 has just been amazing. And I just can't believe how much stuff I'm cutting. It's just, and the one thing that's kind of bogged things down is that more and more people are going to Europe. So I have to leave Monday and Tuesday open for Europe only. So I'm booked out like 8 weeks for Mondays and Tuesdays, and I have some time. Huh?
Going to Europe to press.
Yeah, because they
want
lacquers shipped on a Wednesday or later because they could sit over a weekend, which would be a long time.
Yep.
So they already take, 2 days to get there. So, sitting over a weekend would just not be good.
When I brought up John Golden a minute ago, that reminded me that I wanted to ask you about. I'm curious to what degree there's sort of camaraderie in the lacquer cutting world. To what degree is there collaboration or working together or
Oh, it's a tight knit, really, really positive relationship. I don't have any people I don't like or won't talk to, or any of that kind of crap. I mean, Doug Sachs was a friend, Bernie Grumman's a friend, John Golden's a friend. I mean, and we all try to help each other out as much as we can. It's a great community.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I wonder,
is there a little bit of rivalry? Yes. But, I don't even consider Bernie to be a fierce competitor. We kind of have different clients, and we both kind of do our own thing and don't step on each other's toes. And if somebody needs to borrow some lacquers or whatever, yeah, sure. I'll help them out.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I wondered about that for a long time, especially when I realized
Chris Bellman's great. I mean, he's just, yeah, he's a neighbor, actually, almost. He's, about a mile away. But yeah, he's a wonderful guy. Really like Chris a lot.
Yeah, you and Chris are my two favorites.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I got to say, Ryan Smith's doing a great job at Sterling too.
Totally.
Yeah, he blows me away because he was
one of his records here that you got me into.
Okay.
You got me into this, Kevin.
Oh man, now I did that too. Now who was that done for?
Ryan K. Smith did this for the Acoustic Sound series. This is the most recent 33 RPM one.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, you did a 45, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, I love that. That's probably my favorite jazz album of all time.
Right. Hearing you say that made me check it out, and I love it too.
Yeah. Just can't beat it. Rudy Van Gelder.
Yes. But yeah, so Ryan does amazing work.
He does. I
love John Golden's work.
No, he's very good.
He reissued, or he cut all of the Sonic Youth reissues.
Yeah.
And they're so good.
Yeah.
They've never sounded so good. I love them.
Yeah, Johnny and I started at Artisan 6 months apart. He was hired in April. I was hired in September. And,
was he also straight out of high school, or is he older?
Oh, no. John's about 8 years older. I don't remember. He had started out as a second engineer under Bones Howe at Wally Heider Recording. And so he was coming in with the tapes actually on some of Bones stuff. So he worked with Bob McLeod on some of that stuff, like Fifth Dimension and whatever. If Bones couldn't come, he would send Johnny. And then, Johnny, as a second engineer for Bones, was also doing first engineering on other projects, and he would bring those to Bob for cutting. And yeah.
That Fifth Dimension?
Yeah. So Bob was impressed with Johnny's engineering and thought, this guy'd probably make a good cutting engineer. So he hired him away from Wally Heider.
Yeah.
And then he was only there for maybe 2 years, and then he left and went to Kendon Recorders and worked there for many years.
And then he was at K-Disc in the 80s.
After that, yeah.
And then he struck out on his own kind of fairly early, right? Like right up, like maybe early 90s or something?
Mid 90s, I think, was when K-Disc shut down. Yeah. And
K-Disc, were they sort of like connected with Rainbow? Was that all sort of one thing?
No. K-Disc was actually, the K was Kaiser, which was one of the vinyl manufacturers, Kaiser Century, which was out in Saugus. They made vinyl out there, and they had a pressing plant, and they had a mastering facility. And they did all of the Armed Forces radio stuff back in the 60s and early 70s. And then they decided to start a higher end mastering facility, and they opened that in Hollywood.
Yeah, I know a lot of the so I'm like one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you too is that like I'm not that much of a jazz guy. Like I've expanded my horizons quite a bit recently because it's just been the reissues have been just so insanely good that it makes me want to explore a little bit more. But really, I'm a rock and roll and punk rock guy, and so like K-Disc, they cut like all that SST stuff in the 80s, and before we talked, I went through like some of your catalog that's on Discogs at least, and I didn't realize that you cut the Descendants original EP, if you even remember.
Was that in the 80s?
That was 1981. Their debut EP is called Fat.
Yeah, that was at my first mastering facility, which was called the Cutting System.
Exactly. Yeah, the cutting you did at the Cutting System. You did that. You did Husker Du's debut.
I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
And what I'm curious about Land Speed Record is that like that's their debut. Is that there was I guess it's about 5 years ago now. They put out this new Husker Du box of a bunch of old stuff. It's like a bunch of like early demos and live stuff and whatnot.
Right.
And they put out a new version of
Spot was the engineer and producer on it. Yeah. Yep. Great guy.
And Spot and they put out a new version of Land Speed Record. They found a new tape with a different show of the same stuff. And what they were saying at the time was that the tape that SST had, like they thought it was maybe some like 7th generation thing and it wasn't that good. Now, this is 40 years ago, and I don't expect you to remember every detail about this, but do you have any memory of that at all?
The tape?
Of cutting that record or
you mean, okay, you're talking about Husker Du now?
Husker Du, yeah, the Land Speed Record. That
okay, yeah. I just remember really liking the music. You know, it was, I wasn't that much into punk, although I wound up doing a lot of punk, you know, I did.
You did, yeah.
Yeah. Ramones and right, the Clash, the Clash. I did a bunch of Clash stuff.
I want to talk about this in a minute,
and I love those guys too. I liked them after they went a little bit more pop, but you know, they kind of lost a following at that point, which was kind of too bad. But
yeah, no, it's great catalog. You, according to Discogs, you cut Slayer's first album.
Well, yeah, that was that for Brian Slagle for
yes, Metal Blade.
Yeah, I did a lot of stuff for him in the early days. Yeah, yeah.
And that was at the cutting. What was it called?
I think most of that stuff was at MCA.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
that was 83. So yeah, sure.
Whitney Recording. Yeah. Armored Saint. Yeah, there were a whole bunch of.
I saw that. Yeah, their debut AP. I think. That you cut that.
Yeah. Brian, interesting character. I liked him, and a good friend of mine went to work for him, and I think he's like the head of A&R there, Mike Faley.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't know him. And then I noticed kind of like as time went on, I thought it was interesting that in like the mid to late 90s, you started cutting a lot of stuff for some like indie punk labels like Man's Ruin and Fat Wreck.
Yeah.
And what I kind of theorized is that like punk was sort of like the only genre that was still holding on to vinyl at that point for the most part.
Well, there was the rap and dance element, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. DJs wanted vinyl.
Right.
But sure. So like, does that also seem like what it is to you too? That like in the late 90s, that's kind of who was wanting to make records, and so
yeah.
So that's why you were cutting their stuff for the most part.
Yeah. Although I also have to add that I actually jumped back into audiophile vinyl in '92.
Right.
That early. Just 2 years after the record basically went away. Yep. DCC started putting out vinyl again, and so we did like greatest hits packages. We did the Eagles' greatest hits, and we did Elton John's greatest hits. And then a lot of other stuff too, Joni Mitchell Blue, and so I kind of felt like I led the charge.
Oh, totally.
on the whole vinyl resurgence.
Yep, I see it like that too. So yeah, what can you tell me about these reissues? So this is I've been curious about this for a long time because number one, this is actually like my pride and joy Kevin Gray cut record. This is one of those records where you drop the needle and you're like, what the fuck is happening here? I thought this was a shitty sounding record, but no, this is an amazing sounding record. And
what year was that reissue done?
2010, I believe. This is 2010, and the label is Drastic Plastic.
Okay.
And Drastic Plastic is a record store in Omaha.
I love those guys.
And so what my
They are
impression
the
is that
coolest.
they decided to branch out into putting out records themselves, right?
Right. Right.
And so like, what do you remember about your experience of working with them? So like you did the Clash, you did
Oh yeah.
the Damned,
Yep. Yep.
you did the Birthday Party, you did a few other things.
They're one of my favorite labels. I mean, the guys are just the coolest, and so
Uh-huh.
they were very fun to work with. And they were really nutty about trying to get the best possible sources on everything. And we got analog tape on some of it, not on all of it.
Right.
I don't want to go into that, but
Yep.
yeah, because they got whatever they could, that was good. I mean, they wouldn't put it out if it wasn't a good sounding source. And I think you just vouched for that.
Totally. The muffs.
Yeah. Yeah.
You cut. And interestingly, one was Drastic Plastic and the other one was Omnivore.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Do you
I've done a
remember-
lot for them too.
Do you
Not
remember-
recently.
Yes. Do you remember why that was, that it was two different labels? Like, did they contact you at the same time?
Well, are they both the same year?
They're very close. Let's see.
Okay.
here. 2017, 2016.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe the rights changed for some reason. You never know with that stuff. And usually they're licensing from. Were those Universal owned titles? Do you know who they were?
I don't know.
I'm guessing it would be Universal.
I mean, the Clash is Sony.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know what the Damned were on. A BMG company.
Oh, okay.
So that's not Universal, right? Universal separate.
No,
from Bertelsmann?
BMG is their own thing. They used to be kind of, shall we say, in bed with Sony, but then they separated out. So most of that kink stuff that I did was for BMG.
Yeah. Yep.
And they're two separate entities. BMG UK couldn't be more separate from BMG US than any other two labels. It's very funny.
Really?
Go figure.
No idea. Huh. Okay.
Yeah, you're bringing back some great memories there.
Oh, cool. Oh yeah, one more Clash thing. This
Okay.
10-inch Black Market Clash. Here's one. You don't have to tell me the specific source of this. But like the story that I understand from the Kind of Blue that sort of like came out with the same sticker and seems to be sort of part of the same series that Ryan K. Smith cut, was that they made a new tape from the original 3-track. They mixed the 3-track down to mono and cut from that.
Right.
Is that something you're allowed to talk about with this? Did you do something similar for this?
No.
You're not allowed to talk about it, or no, you didn't do that?
I didn't do a mix down from 3-track. That's I can tell you for sure. And usually that would not be done from the 3-track tape. They would have somebody do the mix. So yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Another one of my favorite albums.
Weirdly, I've yet to really get into this one. I don't know. It's yet to speak to me for some reason.
Okay.
I do tend to like weirder and darker jazz.
Miles is kind of an acquired taste. I mean, Kind of Blue is sort of a slam dunk, but
see, the first Miles I ever got into was kind of a weird one, which is Field de Kilimanjaro, however that's pronounced. And I got into him because I was curious about Tony Williams.
Okay.
And I'm a drummer, so like I just wanted to hear. So that was kind of like my first exposure to jazz. Is like in my late teens was the Tony Williams era of Miles.
If you want some really accessible Miles, I mean, some of my favorite stuff were the 3 or 4 prestige titles that he did that all have similar names. It's like Working with Miles, Relaxing with Miles. I can't even remember the other 2 titles, or 3 titles, or whatever they are. But those are very accessible musically. Just great stuff, I think. Some of my favorite Miles stuff. And that's all mono. Since you seem to be into mono.
I totally am into mono from that era. Like
oh man, some of my favorites. I love the record.
And so you getting me into the Oliver Nelson made me start getting into Eric Dolphy. And again, because this stuff is all just coming out and it all sounds amazing, it's just really easy to get into.
That's my favorite Blakey record.
This is, I had never heard Blakey before I got this. Only a few weeks ago I got this. I was really struck by how sort of straight ahead he plays. Yeah, I expected like a drummer as a band leader, he's gonna like do whatever he wants, but like he's total like straight ahead drumming. And
it depends. Certain albums he was a little more out there, Yeah, that's a very straight ahead one. Yeah,
that's you.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is the Prestige one that like I think this was originally Acoustics Analog Productions, and then it went back to Prestige, and now Analog Productions.
Is that the 45?
No, it's a 33 mono.
Oh, okay, I'm not sure I did that one. I did the 45.
It's Scott, you did it.
Oh, I did one. Was it really recent?
No, this is somewhat old, I think. I
Okay.
don't know the exact year, but
okay. I've done it many times. I mean, some of these titles I think I've done 5 times. It's very funny.
That's what's funny, yeah. And like this one is just a no-brainer. It's Miles 60's band, but you trade out.
Speak No Evil and Adam's Apple are my 2 favorite Wayne Shorter albums. Just they're both amazing. Check out Adam's Apple.
I'm really curious about Juju and Night Watcher too. Which you cut, but you can't get anymore for less than $300 or whatever.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I have no control over that.
Yeah, so I'm hoping those will come out as a classic series or a tone poet or something.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we at time wise here? We're pushing an hour. I was hoping to kind of keep it close to an hour.
We're fine. I got all the time in the world. I'm having fun.
Okay, I do too. I don't want it to stretch out too long either, but
no.
I do have a couple of things I'd like to talk to you about.
Sure.
So total change of subject. I have yet to find a good sort of distillation of what the heck DSD is. And I wonder if you've got a good distillation or elevator speech of like, here's what DSD is. Because I like DSD. I rip my records with the Korg DSD.
I know the box. Yep.
And I love it. I think they sound awesome. Do you think you could give me the elevator?
Well, it's one instead of being 16 or 24 bit or whatever. It's one floating bit moving really fast, up in the megahertz range, and it requires a whole lot of what they call noise shaping to make it even work, and that's where I seem to have a problem with it. There's an artifact that I hear with DSD on the extreme top end that they didn't get around until they went to the new 4 times rate DSD, which gets that noise shaping way, way, way up in frequency. And that sounds spectacular. It's probably the finest sounding digital format that I've heard. But regular, what they call DSD 64, which is the original. And not all converters on that are equal. One that sounds really, really good is actually the Tascam 1000 HD, which has its own converters and everything in it, and their DSD converters are wonderful. Probably the best sounding DSD that I've heard. I like it better than even the separate Meitner converters and some of the other stuff. But did I answer your question? I don't.
That's kind of the level that I've understood it up to this point. That it's just like one bit going. Like I heard someone describe it as because it's one bit, it's this constant sort of like yes no question basically. And it's basically like the answer is like, is this frequency louder or quieter than the previous sample? And that it's constantly doing that really fast all the way up and down the frequency range. Is that anywhere close to truth?
Well, I don't know how to quite quantify that, but I'll tell you that it's sort of like drawing the waveform. I mean, it's kind of a fallacy to say that it's more analog than 16-bit because it is actually drawing the waveform. Well, it is. But it's also, there's only ones, there's no zero, and that one, because there's only one, is always in saturation. So, but the fact that you have this process called noise shaping, they can derive a thing that's low distortion and sounds reasonably good.
Gotcha.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Like I don't buy Super Audio CDs, but like I said, I rip my records with that Korg box recorder, and I love it.
Yeah, the downside to it, I think, from a production standpoint, is you can't edit it without having a workstation that's specifically set up for DSD. The best one that I know is made by Pyramix. That's what most people are using.
Right. So like if you're mastering an SACD, you've basically got to you're playing back the tape, and you've got to get all your EQs set up sort of as you record it, basically, right?
Well, what I do is I just transfer simultaneously to the Tascam 1000 HD as I cut the lacquer. So it has the same EQ and the same everything that I'm doing for vinyl. Yeah.
Gotcha. See, okay. Yep. Makes sense.
And then that gets sent off to Gus Guinness in Colorado, and he does the authoring using, I'm assuming, Pyramix. I don't know. Or no, I think he uses the Sonoma system or whatever it's called. Yeah. But
is that the guy that there's a guy whose videos I've seen on YouTube who talks kind of endlessly about DSD.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of the name, or I can't think of any of the details about him off the top of my head, but he's in Colorado.
Okay, it's probably him.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he used to be in Boulder. He's now in Longmont.
I got a friend in Longmont.
It's sort of a neighboring city,
exactly.
right?
It's just north of Boulder. Yeah, like I think 10 minutes or something like that north of Boulder.
Yeah. Well, next time you visit him, you should visit Gus. He's a great guy.
Totally. Yeah.
I'm sure he'd love to give you a tour and talk about it.
Yeah. Cool. Let me see what else I got on my list. If I've gotten everything. Your sense, what I wrote down was, I feel like you kind of address this. Your sense of tape storage of majors versus indies. Do they use the same facilities? So like, I bet my guess is that like tape storage is all over the map in terms of like, there are some artists that like keep them at their house probably. And
no, they're pretty much all at the well, unless they bought back their masters from the label, they're at the label's facilities. Now, here's the deal. Warner has got 2 tape vaults, one in Burbank, one in North Hollywood, and they are exquisite. They are temperature controlled. They are like bulletproof. They are amazing. Probably bomb proof. I mean, they have like, like vault doors, that kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
So it's literally a tape vault.
Mm-hmm.
Capital, Universal, whatever you want to call that whole thing, they used to keep all of their tapes at the tower underground, in the spaces below. But
that famous Capitol building.
Yeah, the tower.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's largely changed with COVID. So all the other people keep their tapes at what they call Iron Mountain, which is not the Iron Mountain back in Pennsylvania. It's all the other storage facilities that company has created. They just use that blanket term. But there used to be a big warehouse in Hollywood on Highland called Beacons, which was a moving company, and they had a big storage facility, and Iron Mountain bought that. So that's where an awful lot of the tapes are. They're in the old Beacons building. Yeah, Iron Mountain is a little bit of a mess. I don't want to get too much into it, but as far as categorizing and labeling and knowing what they've got, they'll have 12 tapes on some particular album. They won't know which ones are the mix, the safety, the EQ copy, it's just all here.
Yeah. Have you gotten to tour any of these facilities at all? Like, do you see sort of how they do stuff?
Yeah, I've been to the Warner Vault many times, both of them, actually, the one in Burbank and the one in North Hollywood. I had to go through a vetting process for them to be willing to send me tapes, which was a really cool thing. Their technical team was a great bunch of guys, and we got along great and went out to lunch, and and I got the gig, so that's why I do so much of the Rhino stuff.
Yep.
Universal, their stuff's well, what's not at the tower. I'm not sure what they're keeping at the tower anymore since COVID, because Jack Arenas, who was their vault guy, is now at Iron Mountain, so not quite sure. And whether it'll all go back to the tower again after that, I don't know. But
and then there was the fire at, was it a Universal facility?
2008. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. They kind of were in denial about that for years, and then when that big expose article came out, that kind of broke it wide open. But there's so much misinformation in that. I mean, like I've cut Buddy Holly's first 2 albums since the fire from the original master tapes, and yet they're still claiming that they were burned up in the fire. This guy and these articles, and you go to Buddy Holly, and his tapes were lost in the 2008 fire. No, but
Yeah, that's right. Because I remember hearing about it not all that long ago, but right, it was because an article came out many years after the fact.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, one of the ones they talked about was, one of the bands they talked about was REM. And so I know that it's out of bounds to ask you that question, so I'm not going to ask you that question about that album.
Yeah.
But it's been interesting to see the wording on, like, so they've got this whole 25th anniversary reissue series.
Yeah.
That's been awesome. Chris Bellman did several of them.
Yeah, I've done a couple.
And then have you ever met Joe Nino Hernez, I think is how you pronounce his name?
Don't think so.
He's at Sterling.
Oh, no.
And I think he's relatively recent guy so anyway, he cut Monster. But like as the years went on, like there was like this subtle shift in the wording on the the hype stickers that started to make you wonder, are they still doing, like,
Yeah.
like green, they said cut from the original analog tape. And then by the most recent ones, you don't really know what they're doing anymore based on the wording. But
Well, a lot of their late stuff was probably digital masters. So.
And that's just the thing, is that, like, that's a 1996 album, right? So
Yeah.
so they were probably I tend to think they were still recording on the analog tape. I guess I could be wrong. Like, they seem like the kind of band that would have still recorded and mixed the tape.
Like Green Day, same way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that ultimately, the only thing that I don't think that it may not have even come out on vinyl in 1996.
Probably not.
And so it was just mastered for CD, and so that's probably the tape that's around now.
Right.
Anyway, I'm going to stop being passive aggressive about trying to find out the source of that. But okay.
I don't think I've gotten myself in too much trouble with you, but I mean, not with
I'm
you,
not,
but with the companies, because of talking to you.
Yeah, that's the last thing I want to do. Absolutely, I do not want to do that.
I'll tell you a quick story.
Mm-hmm.
You'll appreciate this. So a reviewer comes over here from Germany. I will not mention his name. And he had written this expose that he wanted to attribute to me and publish with my blessing, in which he basically said that it was kind of like me against the world, that I was taking on the world in what I do. And, how can I put it?
Like from what point of view? Like that you were trying to, like, cause phonograph records to still exist when the world is wanting them to not exist anymore?
No, not that. It's in terms of, it was like I was constantly doing battle with the labels to get the best sources and to do all of this kind of stuff. And I basically said, I have to work with these people every day, and the way you've put it, it makes it sound like I'm at battle, at odds with all of these people. And I said, I can't really go along with that, because, you're hampering my ability to make a living here.
Yeah, and that's, I'm getting the absolute opposite vibe from you, is that you see them as partners.
Exactly.
And that you work with them and you appreciate the work you get from them.
Right.
And
he said, the way he put it was that they were big brother, and that I was battling big brother to further my craft. And it's like, I don't think I'd have too many clients if that word got out.
Right.
Don't go to Kevin Gray; he'll battle you on everything.
Right. No, it's clearly nothing could be further from the truth. No. Okay.
On that note.
I feel like we covered the stuff I want to cover, and we're at about an hour, and that I don't know, the whole thing feels round to me, and I'm happy kind of leaving it at that.
Sure. Okay. And I'm with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, I don't want to embarrass you, but I just, like, this is such a huge thrill for me. Thanks, Kevin, for doing this.
Oh, you're most welcome. Happy to do it, and great meeting you, and wish you the best.
Yeah. Likewise.
Anybody who's furthering vinyl is a friend of mine.
Yeah. That is kind of what I'm trying to do with the channel. It's just
Sure.
Talk about records, and they're fun.
All right.
Okay. Thanks again. Take care.
You too.
So long.
Bye.
Bye-bye.